I'm Will Church here at the 2016 KNID Agrifest, and here with me is Attorney General Scott Pruitt. He was actually the keynote speaker at the AFR Farm and Ranch Forum a few minutes earlier. And in your remarks earlier, you mentioned the EPA rule change to redefine what constitutes the waters of the United States. Now, can you expand on this and explain how it will affect us in Oklahoma?
Well, first and foremost, the good news is that the EPA, that when they tried to redefine what constitutes the water of the United States, so they would have more power, more jurisdiction over how we use our land, they've been stopped. I mean, we joined with about 29 other states, about 30 plus states, sued the EPA to say that they were acting unlawfully, and the good news is that happened. And it was important, Will, because when you look at what the EPA was trying to do, it was quite breathtaking. Because under the Clean Water Act, the EPA only has jurisdiction over waterways that are navigable, meaning that we have something in the Constitution called the Interstate Commerce Clause. And so navigability is a key thing because it shows what? Connectivity between states. Well, the EPA tried to change all that to say we don't need to be limited by whether it's navigable or not, so long as the waterway or body has a nexus, a connection to navigability, we're going to regulate. Now that meant dry creek beds in Oklahoma that were dry 90% of the year. When we had heavy rains, that water that was in the dry creek bed 10% of the year would flow downstream, connect to a navigable stream of water at some point, and the EPA was asserting jurisdiction over those dry creek beds. So if you were doing earthwork on your land, with no water in the dry creek bed at all, the EPA was trying to assert jurisdiction there. So it was a breathtaking abuse of power, in my view, and also about honestly just being involved in decisions, day in and day out decisions of how we use our land, how we farm and ranch, how we do engage in oil and gas development, building subdivisions. All those things will be affected because private property was in the crosshairs of the EPA. So good news is we've stopped them, and hopefully that will stay in place until this president leaves office.
Now, speaking of the EPA, you as well as 13 other state attorneys general called on the EPA this past year to withdraw their newly proposed ozone rule. Now, how did you see this affecting Oklahomans?
Well, the ozone rule is something much like the climate action plan with CO2. What the president is doing, he likes to talk a lot about science and how he's relying upon science. What's exactly the opposite of that in many instances, because he's going into issues like the ozone and saying we're going to require standards there that are not tethered or related at all to the scientific studies that we've engaged in from the EPA perspective. And it's placing more and more cities and more towns across the country in what we call the ozone type of red alerts. When you drive through certain towns and they say it's an ozone day because it's very hot, not much wind, and so what the EPA was trying to do was expand those areas so it gave them more authority to impose their obligations on cities across the country, not just in Oklahoma. So we're working to make sure that, again, that these rules that are passed by the EPA, they need to be based upon sound science, not based upon the whims of the president because he wants to impose obligations on cities and towns and states across the country.
Now, another frequent topic in the news recently is kind of related to this, been about climate change, and even more specifically, meeting of world leaders at the Climate Change Summit in Paris. Now, give me your take on some of the potential effects, such as changing in emission standards that could impact us here in Oklahoma.
What's key, first and foremost, about the meetings in Paris is what they represent, and they represent an effort by the administration and by the White House to avoid the treaty authority of the U.S. Senate, because that summit was about nations coming together to make commitments to one another with respect to carbon emissions. Typically, like the Kyoto Protocol from a couple of decades before, those kinds of things, if they're going to be enforceable, they have to go through the U.S. Senate for approval, which requires a supermajority approval. The president knew he couldn't do that. And so because of that, he said, well, we're not going to do a treaty, and we're going to make all these commitments, but we're not going to call them commitments. We're going to say that they're permissive instead of mandatory. But what's happened is he's brought those commitments back from this contract that was signed by him and his administration. He's now trying to adopt those regulations through the agency process to bypass treaties, to bypass Congress altogether. That's wrong. And that's what we should make sure, first and foremost, that we say and that we fight against. As far as what it means for Oklahoma, I mean, when you look at the climate action agenda of the president to begin with, it's an anti-fossil fuel mentality. He doesn't believe in natural gas, oil, and coal. which generates about 70% of our electricity. And so he is trying to put coal out of business and other fossil fuels, which is going to drive electricity rates through the roof. We had just one example in Oklahoma a couple years ago with one rule by the EPA out of the Clean Air Act. It generated almost $1 billion of additional cost that OG&E and PSO had to put within their facilities to comply with the rule. Guess what happens with that $1 billion? All that's passed off to consumers through higher electricity rates. So to turn on these lights here, the president is making it such that it's going to cost us more, which will make us use less. Jimmy Carter talked about voluntary conservation, or conservation in the 1970s.
Yes.
This president's trying to do it by mandating us to use energy less by making it so expensive.
Now, finally, Oklahomans will have the opportunity to vote on State Question 777 this November. Now, what are your thoughts on this state question, and what are some of the reasons behind it?
Private property is so key and instrumental to our country generally. I mean, the founding fathers understood that. They understood that the ability to make a life as a landowner, the ability to make life in your communities and as a state is something that should be held dear and precious. And we've seen nationally, particularly, we've seen agencies at the federal level adopt regulations that impede our ability to just live a life and make a life. And we've mentioned some of those today with the Waters of the United States and others. And so this effort, as I understand it, I was not involved in it because I'm not in the legislature, but it was drafted at the legislature, working with those that are concerned about those issues, is to say, look, private property is valuable. Private property is something we should hold dear and respect, and it's very precious to us as a country and as individual citizens. If government is going to come in and take that private property or affect it in some way that affects our ability to use the land, it should be a very meaningful and compelling reason to do so. And so it's an effort, as I understand it, to advance the notion of rights of citizens to do with their property what they wish, and make sure that government is not overstepping its bounds to affect that in an adverse way. And if they do act, they do so within boundaries that are very much committed to safeguarding private property rights.
Well, Scott, thank you for your time. It's been an honor to visit with you.
It's an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you.
Hi, my name is Bethany Niles, and I'm here with Mike Sanders, representative from House District 59. So, Mr. Sanders, before you became a legislator, could you tell us a little bit of background of yourself?
Absolutely, Bethany. Well, I had the honor to work on the George W. Bush presidential campaign in 2000. Worked there for a year. And of course, politics and campaigns have always been in my background. And in western Oklahoma, worked for Congressman Lucas, Senator Nichols, Governor Keating. Great public servants. Ultimately, that led me to the Bush campaign in 2000. After serving in that capacity, I was able to be named as the Bush White House intern director. And so we had a wonderful time, over 1,000 interns that I hired from across the country. Kids that I knew were going to be, wanting to have an understanding in politics and wanted just a new experience. And of the 4 years that I served in the White House, as I said, 1,000 kids all over the country in 35 different White House offices. So ultimately, that was what kind of got my start in Washington, D.C., and very honored to do that.
So Oklahoma has a major budget deficit. So what do you think that this will impact on education?
Well, you're looking at a $900 million differential in spending from last year. I mean, so there's going to be some tough decisions that are going to have to be made. Ultimately, there will be some cuts. Again, as a subcommittee chairman, one of my responsibilities in transportation that I oversee is we're going to have to really dig down and where we can cut and make it efficient, we're going to have to do that because we are required by law to leave session at the end of May with a balanced budget. Unlike Washington, D.C., we have to leave session with a balanced budget, which is good. The bad part of that is there will be cuts. Now, whether or not it's in education, I would hope to leave Common Ed as harmless as possible. That's one of my goals. I have two sisters that teach, so I know that Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter dinners are going to be really fun. So I think we need to look at higher ed funding. I think we need to look at different commissions and boards, looking at the whole budget process. So again, not knowing how the budget's going to turn out and what the actual numbers will be, we're just going to have to prioritize our spending and make sure that we don't hurt Common Ed, or at least as much as possible.
Okay. And so a very hot topic right now is State Question 777. So could you give us a little bit more info and your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. This is the Right to Farm Act, and my desk mate is Representative Scott Biggs, who was the author of this bill going through the House and Senate. Basically, what this does in a nutshell is you have the right to farm, however it is necessary to do that. And you have groups like HSUS, PETA, the Sierra Club trying to come in. And it's ironic that they're trying this in Oklahoma. It's not like they're trying this in New York or wherever, Vermont. But what they're trying to do is if they can implement this, then they can do it anywhere. Because Oklahoma is such an agricultural state. Farmers and ranchers have the right to farm their land, best practices. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. It's not like this is, we're abusing animals, we're soiling the water, we're contaminating the air. That's absolutely hogwash. Ultimately, this group is being funded by all these very ultra-liberal groups. We in Oklahoma need to take a stand. I'm 150% supportive of this. I was a co-author of that bill and State Question, and I can assure you that representing a rural Northwest Oklahoma district, I'm going to be 150% in favor of the passage of this bill. And of course, being a former FFA Blue and Gold alum, I will use it and go to every FFA high school organization in the state for those young voters to get out and vote in support of this measure because it's the right thing to do.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Erin Cusack here at the 2016 KNID Agrifest. I'm with Heather Beckmaster. Heather, tell me a little about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Executive Director of the Oklahoma Beef Council. The Oklahoma Beef Council is the marketing education arm of the Oklahoma cattle industry. We're funded by all beef producers in the state, and our mission is to basically grow and protect beef demand through marketing, education, and research programs.
So tell me a little bit about these programs.
Well, I could give you some examples. First thing you need to know is that we fund programs in a mix that includes 30% international, 30% national, 30% in Oklahoma, and 10% what we call high pop, low cattle. Oklahoma has more cattle than people, so we like to make sure we're investing dollars to grow beef demand in those states that have those greater populations. On a local level, just thinking through our programs, one of our best ones that I absolutely love is our MBA program, a Masters of Beef Advocacy program. We all talk every day about how we need to do a better job of reaching out to consumers, and so our MBA program is we've got it integrated, I should say, with our Oklahoma FFA program. So FFA students can go through the program, receive awards, but also at the same time learn how to speak to consumers and to their peers about how we raise food and how we raise beef in Oklahoma.
All right. Well, thank you, Heather. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
KNID Agrifest, and I'm here with Scott Biggs, U.S. Representative.
I'm Dawson Hayworth. I'm here at the KNID Agrifest. I'm here with Mr. Roy Lee Lindsay, the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Pork Council. I have a few questions for you here.
Sure.
Being the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Pork Council, what can you tell me about the pork industry today in Oklahoma?
Well, the pork industry in Oklahoma is still growing just a little bit. We are the second largest ag commodity in the state. I think that's a surprise to most folks in terms of cash receipts. Varies a little bit. Cattle obviously have been number one for a lot of years. Wheat, poultry, and pork are almost interchangeable depending on what the market holds. But when market prices are good, pork will be second, and they've been pretty good the last couple of years. So we're second largest ag commodity in the state. We've got operations all across the state of Oklahoma. We provide food around the world. Processing plant in Guyman, Oklahoma ships more product to Japan than anyone else in the country. So really, really proud of that opportunity and that responsibility we have to provide food all around the world.
Thank you. What has the Oklahoma Pork Council done to protect the rights of the small-time pork producer?
Well, we try our best to represent the interests of all pork producers across the state, whether the 4-H and FFA kid with one pig or whether it's one of the large companies that have several thousand here in Oklahoma. We've tried to make sure that our regulations from the state don't negatively impact those smallest producers as well as the largest producers. We believe we have a responsibility to protect your freedom to operate. And one of the things that is key to us is that idea of choice. We want you as the producer to have the opportunity to choose what kind of operations you do. If you want to have 2,500 sows, you ought to have the right to have 2,500 sows. If you want a 25 sow operation, you ought to be able to have a 25 sow operation. And we ought to be able to do that within a framework that protects the environment, that encourages proper animal care, that encourages good food safety, all of those components. And they shouldn't make any difference whether you're the smallest guy in the room or the largest guy in the room. We should all be working towards that same standard.
How will the PRRS-resistant pigs discovered at the University of Missouri affect the local Oklahoma pigs?
That's a great question, and it's fascinating. I think that is one of the, we talk about technology and how technology makes leaps forward. And if you go back and look, it's been 6 or 8 years ago, the industry came up with a vaccine for circovirus. And if you look at what happened to growth in terms of pigs per litter, in terms of overall pork production, you can watch the growth. And right in there about 2008, when they came up with a vaccine for circovirus, you saw a tremendous spike in terms of what production was. Production just shot through the roof because suddenly a disease that was just rampant in destroying production, in reducing what we did, was eliminated. We had a way to control it. Well, PRRS, because it changes so much, we've not been able to come up with a successful vaccine that really keeps PRRS out. It changes too much. So if we can come up with a pig that is naturally resistant to PRRS, that's an absolute game changer in terms of where we get to. For perspective's sake, when you had farms that developed PED several years ago, and actually lost whole litters, and you'd lose every pig that was born for about 4 weeks. When I talk to those producers after the fact, yes, that's a horrible experience. They don't ever want to go through it again. But for many of them, the impact of PRRS long term has a bigger effect on their bottom line than it did when they lost every pig that was born for 4 weeks. Now think about that. So if you can eliminate that disease altogether, what's the end result? And the end result is tremendous productivity and great increases for our producers.
And kind of bouncing off to a different topic, what is the Oklahoma Pork Council doing now to help young students who want to get involved and want to support the pork industry? What is it doing to really help them do everything they can?
One of the best programs that we have for young people is our current youth leadership camp program. And I am, of all the things we've done in 17 years I've been at the Oklahoma Pork Council, I am more proud of this youth leadership camp than anything else. And it literally is a complete immersion into commercial pork production. You know, it's one thing to have a sow and raise a litter of show pigs. It's another to know what happens on a sow farm that has 5,000 sows, and how they breed sows, and how they collect boars, and what they do to process baby pigs and where that is. And so we literally pick 12 students from across the state each year, those that have completed their sophomore year through completed their senior year of high school, and through an application and interview process, we select those 12 students, and we start in Stillwater. Those students get to see the inside of a commercial sow farm. They get to see the processing plant at Guyman. They get to talk with folks about the challenges of running large-scale pork production. They get to visit with folks about what actually happens on the farm every day. And so you start with kids that already have a love for pigs, and then you give them the knowledge and talk about the opportunities that exist. We even run them out in Stillwater at the Food and Ag Products Center. We'll do a live animal evaluation on hogs today, and then we'll harvest those hogs tomorrow. And so those kids literally get to see the animal go from standing on the hoof today to by the end of the week, they're wrapping it up in a package of pork chops. I mean, they see how all of that works. It is the best tool we have for recruiting students into the pork industry. And I don't know that we get enough kids applying. We had 25 or 6 applicants last year. We'd love to have 40. It makes our job a little harder to select it, but tremendous program. No cost to the students. You can find information about it on our website at okpork.org. We'll be talking about it a little bit at the Oklahoma Youth Expo, but it's an application interview process, and we'd encourage all of our FFA members, if they've got any interest at all in the pork industry, to check out the Oklahoma Pork Youth Leadership Camp.
Okay, and going off of that, what do you see the future of the pork industry going off the next 5 to 10 years of all these new pork producers coming in and how our market is today? How do you think that'll be like the next 10 years?
That's a really good question. Short term, I think we're going to see some challenges here in the United States with processing capacity, the number of spaces we have at our processing plants for taking in hogs. I think we're going to butt up against that. But in 2017, we're going to see 2 new processing plants come online that have the ability to process, when they're fully operational, about 10 million more pigs a year. So long term, there's going to be lots of opportunity for folks. The biggest opportunities for us as an industry across the country is exporting our pork. We are the least cost provider of pork around the world. We have a safe, consistent, abundant product. It's affordable, and folks around the world love it. When you look at markets like China, you look at markets like Japan, at South Korea, even at Vietnam, Asian market in particular loves pork. It's the protein of choice. It's actually, pork is the protein of choice around the world. So our opportunity to sell our pork to other countries is where the real growth opportunities are for the pork industry long term. And so for young people that are looking to work in agriculture and want to be in the swine industry, China can't feed itself. They don't have enough land. They've got too many people. They're going to have to buy food. And we can produce pork cheaper than they can produce it today. Ultimately, they're going to buy pork from the United States. And so here's a growth opportunity, I think, around the world. The Trans-Pacific Partnership that's now sitting in front of Congress, going to open up trade opportunities for us all over the world. A great opportunity for us to sell our product around the world, and for young people, lots of opportunity to be a part of that growth.
I want to once again thank you for taking time out of your day and answering just a few of my questions. And
Sure.
just thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kara Schlauthauer, and I am here with Senator Glenn Coffey discussing State Question 777. And he is a part of the Oklahoma Farmers Care. So for the viewers who may not know, what is Oklahoma Farmers Care?
Oklahoma Farmers Care is an organization by concerned Oklahomans, primarily in agriculture, but from all walks of life, that are promoting the State Question 777, that it pass, and raising money to support it.
All right. How would you educate those who may not know what Oklahoma Farmers Care is?
Over the next several months, you're going to see ads, social media. We're going to be getting the word out in all the ways we can that this is just a way to protect Oklahoma farmer ranching, Oklahoma's farmers and ranchers in this state.
That's definitely something that we need to be working on. I know you're a big advocate of State Question 777. What would you say to those people who may oppose that?
Well, I think all this does simply is say that you have to have a compelling state interest to pass any regulation at the legislature that affects farming and ranching. And I would encourage them to find out the facts and find out what this really does, and approach it with an open mind, because I think it's something that benefits all Oklahomans, and would urge them to vote yes.
I agree. I'm sure there's people with questions about this state question. Who would they contact, and where would they go to get their answers?
Well, you can go online to OklahomaRightToFarm.com, or I believe it's at yes on 777 on Twitter.
That sounds great. Definitely get your parents to vote for State Question 777, and we hope that you do.
Hi, I'm Erin Cusack at the 2016 KNID Agrifest. I'm here with Michael Kelsey of the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association. Mr. Kelsey, how can the association help your typical farmer here in Northwest Oklahoma?
It's a great question, Erin. Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association, we're a membership-based organization, so cattle producers, whether you're large, small, stocker, seed stock producer, commercial cow-calf producer, whatever the case may be, those are our members. And what we do on their behalf is, from a big picture standpoint or a beef industry standpoint, we're down at the Capitol every day during the session, walking the halls. I wear my hat every day at session to show that I'm a cattleman, and I am. I was raised in the cattle business. It's such an honor to represent cattle producers at the state legislature. We also do that representation on the federal level as well. We're affiliated with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, so I'll go to D.C. 2 to 4 times a year myself, but then we have that affiliation with the National Association Association, so we're representing cattlemen on issues that are important in Washington as well as Oklahoma. We also do that on the regulatory side of things. So whether it's the Department of Environmental Quality or Department of Transportation regarding truck weights or some of those types of things, we'll work with those regulatory agencies to interpret rules that will be more friendly to cattle producers and more business acceptable in that sense. So we do those overarching things. Then the other thing we do is, there's several things we do. Obviously, educational standpoint, providing education and information to our members, but we'll also work on members' individual behalf. And so, for instance, we had a member actually in northwest Oklahoma, way out in the western end of the Panhandle, but she called and asked, she said, hey, I just got a letter from an attorney in Houston, and they're suing me for $18,000 because my neighbor's cattle came across me, got onto the road, and were hit by a semi, and this attorney was representing the truck driver. What can I do? I said, let's work with you, because state law is very clear on who is liable in that case, and she is not. And so we went to work on her behalf to represent her and give her information she needed to avoid that lawsuit. So my point in sharing that is we work on an individual basis with members occasionally when they may need some help on some of those types of issues. So working with those folks is very important to us.
All right. How will State Question 777 help with beef production?
Oh, it's very, very important for the future of agriculture in Oklahoma. State Question 777, Oklahoma's right to farm. What it does basically is it prohibits the legislature from passing any legislation against agriculture, farming and ranching, unless there's a compelling state interest. And so that would allow the legislature to address those issues such as water quality, truck transportation weight, some of those types of things that have a compelling state interest. But we see some animal rights groups that would like to pass legislation like it's illegal to brand cattle in the state of Oklahoma. The state has no compelling interest to address that issue, so the legislature shouldn't do that. This would prohibit them from doing that. So it's very important in that sense to protect us from those out-of-state, non-Oklahoma interests that are some of those extreme animal rights groups that kind of some of us go, wow, I can't believe anybody would think like that, yet we know that that's out there. And so it's very important from that sense. I like to look at this from a future of agriculture standpoint. It's crucially important. Every 10 years we redistrict the legislature. That's in our Constitution to do that. And we redistrict those legislative districts. And so what happens every 10 years is our legislative districts in the urban areas get smaller because people are moving to the cities. We all know that. Our districts in the rural area get bigger. There's less people there. And there's more of the districts in urban areas. So what's happening is our legislature is becoming more and more urban. So as people who represent us get further away from agriculture, they understand less what we do in agriculture. I would assume that most folks in Fairview High School on Christmas morning, they got up and took care of the animals before they opened presents. That's not the way it is in the urban area. And so we need them to understand how we take care of agriculture, and this gives us a tool to help us insulate ourselves from some of those extreme ideas that would really hinder and hurt what we do.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Kelsey. Nice to have you.
Thank you. It's great to hear. Thanks, Aaron.
Howdy, neighbors. I'm Megan Martins here at the KNID Agrifest. I'm here with Ron Hayes, the Director of Farm Programming Radio Oklahoma Network. So, Ron, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the ag broadcasting and exactly what your title causes or allows you to do?
Right. Maggie, thanks for having me today. And I got started in radio in junior high and high school, and got interested in first listening to far-off radio stations and something called DXing, and I did that late at night. And so the radio bug kind of bit me early on. Had an opportunity to go to work for a local radio station in the state of Kentucky where I grew up. In college, I studied kind of a combination of journalism and some broadcast classes as well as agriculture. Along the way, I was in FFA as well. All of that kind of came together. Had the opportunity to come to work in first Wichita, Kansas, back in the 1970s, and then later in Oklahoma City for originally the Oklahoma Agrinet, and then about 8 or 9 years ago for the Radio Oklahoma Network. Ron on Ron now.
I see. So you're considered the voice of Oklahoma agriculture. You're going around covering ag issues. So since you get to go around and talk with ag producers and ag industry leaders, do they ever come and seek your advice on ag issues?
Well, I think there are times I'll get calls and we'll talk about what's going on, and they'll want to hear what I'm hearing in a lot of cases because the fact that I do go to a lot of different meetings, and they want to know, well, who's saying this about that, and really, what's the mood of the people that you talk to. So I'm able to share some of that information. When you go out and you actually go to other meetings and you go and hear a lot of some of the top experts or top thinkers on some of these various agricultural issues. We cover a lot of events either over the telephone or internet or in person. You add all of that up, really we have the opportunity to relate a lot of information, not just on the air or not just on our website or the email that we send out every day. We also, a lot of times have those direct, conversations one-on-one.
I see. So one of the big issues right now in ag is this state question 777, which will appear on the presidential ballot in November. That's right. So if somebody was to come to you and ask you, hey, I don't know anything about this, how would you explain this right to farm amendment?
Well, Right to Farm, that's kind of its nickname. The official, I guess, the title is State Question 777. It will be on the November election ballot. Either a yes or a no vote will be requested of each voter in the state of Oklahoma. This is all about basically setting a higher standard when it comes to new legislation that the lawmakers in our state representatives, our state senators could actually introduce that might dictate how a farmer or rancher does what he does in producing our safe, affordable food supply here in the state of Oklahoma. Basically, it tells farmers or tells the state legislature you cannot pass legislation without a compelling state reason to actually indicate a change or some prohibition on farming and ranching in the state. Pretty simple, doesn't usurp or change any existing laws, doesn't change any existing regulations, doesn't impact federal rules or regulations. It simply is a roadblock for someone coming from outside of Oklahoma trying to tell our lawmakers or entice our lawmakers into passing something that could be bad for farmers and ranchers.
So coming from a small town, rural community, it seems that this bill shouldn't be very hard to pass. But, however, we also got to remember that we have Oklahoma City and Tulsa, big cities that have people in there that with very little agricultural knowledge. So what are some strategies that people are using to promote this State Question 777?
Well, there's going to be an opposition as well as the proponents, the supporters of 777. The supporters are agricultural groups and their members, Farm Bureau, American Farmers and Ranchers, the Oklahoma Cattlemen, Oklahoma Pork Council, the Oklahoma Wheat Growers Association, our state agricultural retailers, and a whole lot of other folks as well that are interested in agriculture. There's a lot of young members of FFA chapters that have expressed a lot of interest in helping to support this and promote it as well. Maybe they can't vote, but they can sure encourage their parents and other adults that they know that this is a vote that needs to happen in favor of 777. On the other side, you've got really some out-of-state groups and a couple of in-state special interest groups that believe that if this is passed, it would be harder for them to dictate what they'd like to see done on the farm. For example, the Sierra Club is an environmental group. They would like to have more stringent environmental regulations than what we even have now, and they feel that their ability to maybe force those on farmers and ranchers would be somehow prohibited or would be likely kept from being actually happening. Humane Society of the U.S. is a name that you've heard a lot about perhaps, and HSUS they have as a goal. They don't say this out loud. They don't say this in their TV commercials. But their goal at the end of the day is to force Americans into eating less meat. They want to see, they have an agenda that they would like to see really most people be vegans or at least vegetarians at the very least. So with that goal in mind, if they can somehow make it more expensive to raise hogs or produce beef or poultry or whatever the agriculture enterprise is, they can accomplish their goal easier that at the end of the day they're trying to achieve.
I see. Well, I'll tell you one thing, they can't stop me from eating steaks and hamburgers. So thank you, Ron, for coming here and letting me interview you and ask you a couple of questions. Have a good day.
Hello, I'm Ethan Seiler, and I'm here with Jim Reese, the Secretary of Ag, at the KNID Agrifest contest. What does the Department of Ag do to alert consumers about the products in agriculture?
Well, we have a Made in Oklahoma coalition. We also have a Made in Oklahoma companies group, and we try to help them get their products out to the market. We actually work with OSU, the FAPSI, the Food and Ag Processing Center, if someone has, say, a jam, a jelly, or barbecue sauce, or something, anything that they make at home that they might want to market statewide and then nationwide, they can go there for a starter course, and then we try to help them give them to the markets, the people that actually buy the food, the grocery stores, and those things. And then beyond that, once that they've got a business and they've got a market, we try to help them with foreign markets. We'll try to, for instance, today, Head Country Barbecue now sells 2 containers, shipping containers of Head Barbecue to Sweden every, I think, month or 2 months. And so, we help them, connect them with buyers from other countries. And we have $2 billion worth of ag products going to other countries today. So that, it's a pretty significant market for agriculture. We are so blessed to live in Oklahoma, where we can provide all of our own food and have plenty left over for the rest of the world.
Okay, so now, what do you help to market, some of the local stuff? How do you help market that to be a bigger...
We bring in buyers, people that we pretty much have all those connections because we deal with them regularly. So the Made in Oklahoma and then the Made in Oklahoma Coalition, we contact them with the retailers who will be selling that product. And so it increases, it helps them to sell their product. And it's not like this is a business that wasn't started back in the early fur trading days. We're still buying and selling like we always have. And so it's just putting those people together. A lot of people on the farm haven't ever marketed their foods, and so we help them do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reese, and just have a good day.
All right, thank you.
Hello, my name is Ethan Sackett, and today we will be visiting with Kent Rollins, the founder and owner of Red River Ranch Chuck Wagon Catering and Cowboy Entertainment. So, Mr. Rollins, when did you begin this catering adventure, and how did it all start?
Well, my mother started me cooking when I was about 7 years old. It was nice to be inside some mornings when it was 10 degrees rather than feeding cows, and I learned to cook at an early age. She taught me cook what you love and love what you cook, and then she taught me that, hey, you gather around the table, you share food, and you share family. And it's always been important to me to come around the table and share food, because it's not the legs that hold the table up, it's the people around it.
That's awesome. You have been named the official Chuck Wagon Cook of Oklahoma and have appeared on acclaimed cooking shows such as NBC's Food Fighters. When you began this catering company, did you ever envision this expansive success?
No, I just envisioned having fun, Ethan, most of the time. Sure, we've got to reach a lot of people in the United States and even across the pond in England and into Canada, and all due to TV, and when I can share the food and the lifestyle of the cowboy that way, well, it makes it even more special for us.
Now, you've been cooking since you're quite young. Do you have a particular dish that is your favorite to create?
Well, we cook a lot of beef, and we're sponsored by Certified Angus Beef, so a ribeye steak is probably one of my favorites, but my favorite dessert is what's in our cookbook over here, and that's a bread pudding with a whiskey cream sauce.
Sounds delicious. Currently, you cater for weddings and corporate events, yet you also stay true to your roots and make time to cook out on the range for working cowboys. What would you say your favorite aspect of this business is for you?
Well, I think the favorite part is always going to be the same, and that's the roots that I have that I was founded in, and that's cowboys. And we still cook on working ranches. Some of them, are quite large, 392,000 acre ranch that we're on 5 weeks. And so when I can still do a part of what this chuck wagon was meant to do, and that's relive history, well, I'm really blessed.
Your cooking has led you to many parts of the United States, and you've seen a lot of places and people. What has been one of your favorite memories throughout those experiences?
Well, some folks hired us to go cook in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. They had brought a wagon in, a friend of mine, so I didn't have to drive that far. And I took my little sweet wife, Shannon, with me. We'd been together for a little while and proposed to her on the airplane. She couldn't get off. I had her trapped at 28,000 foot, so it was a good thing. And she works beside me 365 days a year, and it's great to have a partner and a friend that you love. It makes business really easy.
That's very special. So you've experienced much success already, but what does the future hold?
Well, the future for us is going to hold fun, I promise you, and a lot of food. But there is some more TV coming out probably this spring and then again this summer. Probably be another cookbook in the works. And mostly just to get to share food and share good times with people. And for me to get to do this and share it with young people like you, Ethan, well, it is truly a blessing. And I thank you for taking the time, my friend.
Thank you. And if you want to know more about Kent Rollins, you can check out his cookbook on Amazon. Thank you, Kent, again.
Oh, thank you, sir.